The morning was cold, the kind of crisp autumn chill that seeped into your bones, making the world feel slower, heavier. The streets were blanketed in a soft mist, curling up from the damp pavement like ghostly fingers stretching toward the sky. The city was just beginning to stir, but it was the kind of place where nothing really ever happened, at least, not the kind of things that made headlines. It was a quiet town, a town where people kept to themselves, where the biggest disturbances were neighborly disputes or the occasional fender bender. But that was about to change. Henry leaned against the squad car, sipping his coffee, as scanning the empty streets with the detached indifference of a man who had done this job for years. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. Madison sat in the car, shuffling through a stack of reports, lost in the routine of paperwork that made up most of their days. It was just another morning. At least that's what they thought. Then Henry saw it. A flash of gray fur slinking out from the mist, moving with a purpose that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. It was the cat. Not just any cat, the cat. The same stray that had lingered around the station for months, weaving in and out of the shadows like some silent observer. No one knew where it came from and no one had ever seen it with an owner. But today, something was different. Henry narrowed his eyes, watching as the feline padded toward them with an uncharacteristic urgency. Its usual lazy, detached demeanor was gone. It wasn't just passing by. It was coming straight for them. "Madison," he muttered, nudging his partner. "Look at the cat." Madison barely glanced up from her papers. "What about it?" "It's acting weird." Madison sighed. "It's a cat, Henry. They do weird things." But Henry wasn't convinced. He set his coffee down, crouching slightly as the cat stopped a few feet away, its piercing yellow eyes locking onto his. Then it let out a sound sharp, insistent. A meow, but not just any meow. It was almost desperate. A plea. A cry for help. That's when Henry's stomach twisted. The cat wasn't just here. It wanted something. "Something's wrong," Henry said, his voice low. Madison finally looked up, frowning as she studied the cat. Its tail twitched, its ears flicked back, and then it took a step backward, almost like it was leading them. It turned, took a few paces, then glanced over its shoulder, eyes burning with something unnerving. Then it meowed again. Louder this time. Henry stood. "We should follow it." Madison hesitated. "Seriously? Look at it." Henry gestured. "It's trying to tell us something." Madison exhaled, shaking her head. "If this is a waste of time, you owe me coffee." With that, the two officers fell into step behind the cat, following as it weaved through the mist-draped streets, slipping through narrow alleys and silent intersections. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere shifted. The city's usual hum of distant traffic and early morning activity faded into an unsettling stillness. It was too quiet. The cat led them beyond the town's busier areas, where buildings grew older, where the sidewalks cracked with neglect. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting jittery pools of light on the damp pavement. Then they saw it. A looming, forgotten warehouse stood at the end of the alley, its windows shattered, its once bold signage now nothing more than faded lettering half swallowed by ivy. It had been abandoned for years, a relic of a time when this part of town had meant something. The cat stopped abruptly in front of the rusted metal doors. It let out another cry, this one laced with something urgent, something almost human in its distress. "Why did it bring us here?" Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry stepped forward, fingers brushing over the heavy chains looped through the handles. But something made him pause. The padlock was old and rusted, but the chain had been moved. "Recently?" "I don't like this," Madison muttered, rubbing her arms as though the cold had finally seeped into her bones. "We need to go inside." Henry grasped the lock, testing it. It wasn't fastened properly. With one sharp tug, it clattered to the ground, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The cat slinked between them, slipping inside the moment Henry pulled the door open. A thick, putrid smell spilled out, clawing at their throats. Madison gagged, covering her mouth. "Oh, God," she whispered. "What is that?" Henry clicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. They stepped inside. The air was thick, suffocating. Dust hung heavy, swirling in the dim light. The warehouse was filled with forgotten remnants, rusted tools, splintered crates, shattered glass. Their boots crunched against debris as they moved deeper in, the cat always just ahead, guiding them. Then they heard it. A sound. Faint. A shuffle. A wheezing breath. Henry's heart pounded. Over there. He pointed his flashlight toward the back of the warehouse, where a mass of shadows twisted and shifted. Madison raised her own beam, and together their lights converged and revealed a figure. A man huddled against the far wall, his body barely visible beneath the tattered remains of what might have once been a coat. His face was pale, gaunt, his eyes hollowed with exhaustion. He looked up at them, lips trembling, his breath shallow. "Oh my God," Madison gasped. "He's alive." Henry rushed forward, dropping to his knees. The man flinched at the movement, his entire body recoiling as if he expected a blow. "It's okay," Henry said quickly, voice low, steady. "We're police officers. You're safe now." The man's lips parted, but no sound came out. He tried again, his voice barely above a rasp. "Help me." The cat let out one final meow, curling around the man's frail form, pressing its warm body against him as if comforting him. Henry's mind reeled. Who was this man? How long had he been here? And how had a stray cat been the one to lead them to him? Madison was already on the radio, calling for backup and an ambulance. As they waited, Henry looked down at the cat, who was now staring at him with those same piercing, knowing eyes. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured. The cat blinked slowly, then settled down beside the man, its body rising and falling in perfect rhythm with his labored breaths. The silence stretched between them. Henry wasn't sure what disturbed him more, that a cat had led them to this man, or that, without it, he might have died alone, lost in the darkness of an abandoned warehouse, with no one ever knowing he was there. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second, Henry exhaled. This wasn't just another quiet day in town. And something told him it was only the beginning. If you love thrilling stories like this, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us bring you more suspenseful tales, and if you've ever had an experience like this, especially one involving animals, tell us about it. Your story might inspire others who, like you, understand the deep bond between humans and animals. The eerie noise at the back of the warehouse echoed off the rusted, decaying walls, making the space feel even more suffocating. Madison instinctively turned to Henry, her eyes wide with apprehension. They both felt it, the weight of the moment, the anticipation thickening the air. Their flashlights trembled slightly in their grips, betraying the adrenaline coursing through their veins. And yet, the cat pressed forward, his every step filled with purpose, his tail flicking in silent urgency. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't lost. He was leading them deeper into the unknown. "What do you think this is?" Madison whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant creaks and groans of the buildings settling around them. Her breath quickened despite her efforts to control it. Every movement, every sound felt amplified in the eerie silence. Henry swallowed hard, his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. "I don't know," he murmured, his eyes locked on the shadows ahead. "But whatever it is, we need to stay sharp." Suddenly, the cat stopped dead in his tracks. He turned back to them, his piercing eyes locking onto theirs as if confirming that they were truly ready for what lay ahead. His meow cut through the stillness, a long, insistent cry, heavy with warning. Madison exhaled shakily, gripping her flashlight tighter. The cat moved again, slipping toward a darkened corner where the warehouse's walls seemed to fold into a deeper void. A chill slithered down her spine. This wasn't just a stray animal leading them on a wild chase. He knew something. He had seen something. As they stepped closer, the surroundings grew even more unsettling. There were signs, subtle but undeniable, that someone had been here recently. Broken boxes were scattered across the floor, their contents spilled in careless haste. The dust had been disturbed, smeared footprints barely visible under their flashlight beams. And then there was the smell, pungent and rancid, clinging to the air like a foul whisper. Madison instinctively raised her sleeve to her nose, gagging at the putrid stench. Henry shot her a look but didn't say a word. He felt it too, that deep gnawing sensation in his gut. Something was very wrong. She aimed her flashlight at a nearby crate. Its wooden slats splintered and broken. Carefully, she reached out and nudged the lid aside. Her breath hitched. Inside were clothes. But not just any clothes. Small coats, tiny shoes, children's belongings. Scattered haphazardly, some still folded, others crumpled as if thrown there in haste. Madison's hands trembled as she picked up a tiny red jacket. "Henry," she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "These are kids' clothes." Henry crouched beside her, eyes narrowing as he examined the pile. His stomach twisted. These weren't old rags or forgotten donations. They were clean, recent. Someone had left them here, and not long ago. Meanwhile, the cat remained motionless, staring past them into the shadows beyond. His body was rigid, ears twitching, as though he were bracing for what came next. Then, a sound. A sudden sharp rustle from deep within the warehouse. Henry's head snapped up, his flashlight darting toward the source. A partially open metal door loomed in the distance, its darkness yawning like a black hole. The noise had come from there. The air grew heavier, thick with an unspoken dread. Madison's pulse hammered in her throat. Henry rose slowly. Someone's in there. Madison barely nodded, unable to tear her eyes from the door. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, as if on cue, the cat let out another meow, this one low, drawn-out, almost mournful. Madison shivered. This is bad. Henry didn't respond. He was already moving, stepping carefully toward the metal door. His instincts screamed for caution, but his curiosity, his duty, propelled him forward. He reached out, fingers brushing the cold steel. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open another inch. And then the smell hit them like a physical force. Rot. Putrid, suffocating decay. Madison reeled, pressing a hand against her mouth. The cat slinked past them, unbothered, disappearing into the abyss beyond. Henry hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a small windowless room. Old furniture, rusted shelves, and more discarded crates littered the floor. But none of that mattered. Because in the center of the room, sprawled lifelessly against the floor, was a body. Madison sucked in a sharp breath, her skin crawling. Oh my God! The corpse had been there for days, maybe weeks. The stench confirmed it. The face was unrecognizable, sunken and pale, but the clothes were still intact. Not a homeless man. Not some forgotten vagrant. This man had been someone. Henry's flashlight flickered over the body's stiff hands. In one something glimmered. A chain, a golden pendant reflecting dimly in the light. A small cross. Henry reached out, carefully pulling it free. He held it up, studying the delicate craftsmanship. This wasn't just jewelry. It meant something. Madison's breath hitched. Who was he? She murmured, horror creeping into her voice. And why was he left here? Before Henry could answer, another sound. But this time it wasn't coming from inside the warehouse. Footsteps. Heavy. Rapid. Approaching from outside. Henry and Madison exchanged a glance, every nerve in their bodies screaming in warning. We need to get out of here, Henry said, his voice low and urgent. They both flicked off their flashlights, plunging the space into darkness. Madison's heartbeat thundered in her ears. They backed away from the body, moving toward the nearest hiding spot behind an overturned crate. The footsteps drew closer, their rhythm steady, purposeful. Whoever it was, they weren't lost. They were coming here. Henry clenched his jaw, muscles tense. He could make out a silhouette at the entrance. A tall figure shrouded in darkness stood motionless, watching. And in his hand, something metallic gleamed in the dim light. Madison gripped Henry's arm. We need to run. But before they could move, the cat, still sitting beside the corpse, let out one final piercing meow. And the figure turned toward them. If you want to know what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe for more. What do you think is going on? Drop your theories in the comments. We want to hear from you. Madison barely had time to breathe before it happened. The cat let out a piercing meow, a sound so sharp and sudden it sliced through the tense silence like a siren. It echoed off the cold steel walls, bouncing through the empty warehouse like an alarm bell. Henry and Madison froze, their bodies turning to stone as a chill ran down their spines. The sound had given them away. The man stopped in his tracks. His head snapped toward the noise, his eyes locking onto the cat that now stood defiantly beside the body. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face, but then his expression hardened. He reached into his coat. Madison's breath hitched. A gun? A knife? She didn't wait to find out. Run! She didn't need to say it twice. Henry was already pulling her toward the side door, their feet pounding against the concrete floor. The sound of footsteps erupted behind them, fast and relentless. The man was coming after them, closing in with every second. They burst through the door into the freezing night air. The warehouse courtyard was a desolate wasteland of rusted machinery and overgrown weeds. The wind howled through the empty lot, biting at their skin as they ran. He's right behind us, Madison gasped, her lungs burning with every frantic breath. Henry grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward the shadows, weaving between stacks of abandoned crates. Their only hope was to lose him in the darkness. The man's footsteps were deafening now, the sound of boots slamming against pavement like the relentless ticking of a countdown. He was getting closer. Madison felt a surge of panic claw at her chest. If he caught them? No. She wouldn't let that happen. They reached the far side of the warehouse, where the broken remains of an old truck lay rusting beneath the moonlight. Henry shoved Madison behind it, pressing a finger to his lips. They crouched low, their breathing ragged, hearts hammering like war drums. The man entered the courtyard. His silhouette was barely visible against the shadows, but the gleam of something metallic in his hand sent a fresh wave of fear through Madison's veins. A gun. He had a gun. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she watched him move. He wasn't rushing anymore. He was taking his time, scanning every inch of the lot with cold precision. He knew they were here. He was hunting them. Madison clenched her fists, trying to steady her shaking hands. The weight of their situation pressed down on her like a boulder. This wasn't just a simple chase. This man wasn't just some petty criminal running from the law. He was dangerous, deadly, and he was willing to kill to protect whatever secret lay hidden in that warehouse. Then, just as Madison thought their luck had run out, another sound cut through the night. A long eerie meow. Her head snapped toward the warehouse. The cat. The feline's voice echoed through the walls, its cry slicing through the air like a signal. The man turned sharply, his attention yanked away from the courtyard. Madison's breath caught in her throat. Was it helping them? The man hesitated. His focus wavered. For a brief moment he was no longer hunting them. He was staring into the darkness of the warehouse, as if debating whether to go back inside. Henry leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. If he goes back in, we run. No looking back. Madison swallowed hard and nodded. Every muscle in her body was coiled like a spring, ready to launch into action the second the opportunity arose. The man glanced around one last time. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped toward the warehouse in trance and disappeared into the shadows. They didn't wait. Henry yanked Madison to her feet, and they sprinted toward the far end of the lot, weaving through the darkness. Every instinct screamed at them to move faster, to get as far away from that place as possible. But something gnawed at Madison's gut. They had seen too much to walk away now. That man wasn't just a random criminal. He was involved in something. Something sinister. And the cat had led them here. To the body. To the truth. Madison slowed her pace, glancing back at the warehouse. Her mind raced with possibilities, theories forming and shattering in an instant. There was more to this. More than they could understand yet. We have to call for backup, she whispered, her voice still shaky from the adrenaline. This man, he's dangerous, Henry. And whatever he's hiding, it's big. Henry nodded, but his gaze was locked on the warehouse entrance. I agree, he said. But first, we need proof. Madison's stomach twisted. Every part of her screamed against the idea of going back inside. But deep down, she knew Henry was right. They couldn't walk away empty-handed. Taking a deep breath, she clenched her fists and steeled herself. We get in, we get what we need, and we get out. Fast. Henry gave a sharp nod. Let's move. They crept along the side of the warehouse, scanning for another way in. A few minutes later, they found it, a small broken window just big enough for them to squeeze through. Henry went first, carefully lowering himself inside. Madison followed, her pulse hammering as she dropped into the darkness. The air inside was thick and stale, laced with the scent of dust and something else, something rotten. A rusted shelf loomed in the corner, covered in forgotten tools and scattered papers. Madison's flashlight flickered as she swept it over the room, searching for anything that could give them answers. Then she saw it. An old iron cabinet. Her gut twisted. There was something about it, something that felt off. Help me open this, she whispered. Henry grabbed a nearby crowbar and jammed it into the rusted lock. With a sharp, metallic groan, the cabinet burst open. What they found inside made Madison's blood run cold. Files. Stacks of them. Old, yellowed folders filled with photographs and reports. Each marked with a name. And every single one belonged to a missing child. Madison's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Photos of innocent faces stared back at her. Dates. Descriptions. Last known locations. Henry's jaw clenched. Oh my God. Madison's eyes burned. This was it. This was the proof they needed. This wasn't just some random crime. It was bigger. It was darker. They had stumbled onto something monstrous. Before they could process it, a sound sent ice through their veins. Footsteps. The man was back. Madison's breath hitched. Henry shoved the files into his coat. They had to move now. But just as they turned toward the exit, a small shadow appeared in the doorway. The cat. Its green eyes glowed in the dim light, staring at them with an intensity that sent chills down Madison's spine. It meowed softly, almost knowingly. And in that moment, Madison realized something. The cat wasn't just a witness. It was leading them to something even worse. And they weren't ready for what came next. The sound that filled the air wasn't the sharp, urgent cry of an alarm. It wasn't the kind of noise that sent shivers down your spine, warning of imminent danger. No, it was different. Softer. Almost comforting. A final whisper in the dark, guiding them one last time. Henry and Madison locked eyes. They understood. This wasn't just an animal's farewell, it was something more. A silent thank you. A knowing glance that told them what they already feared. This was far from over. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The weight of what they had discovered pressed on their chests like a vice, squeezing the breath from their lungs. Their time inside this warehouse had already stretched too long, and with every passing second, their window of escape narrowed. The man, their hunter, was still out there. Still armed. Still searching. Without another word, they prepared to move. Every step was deliberate, calculated. They had no room for mistakes. Their bodies were tense, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. One wrong move, one sound too loud, and it would all be over. As they reached the exit, Madison hesitated. Something made her look back. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something else. But there it was, the cat. Still sitting, still watching, its golden eyes glowing in the dim light, reflecting something deep and unfathomable. A guardian in the shadows. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Then she turned away and stepped through the door. A loud screech of metal cut through the silence like a blade. The warehouse, once still and heavy with quiet, erupted with noise. Henry and Madison froze. Their blood turned to ice. In the distance, a sharp intake of breath. A shift in the air. Then movement. Fast. Purposeful. The man had heard them. Henry's heart pounded as he caught sight of the figure turning toward them, gun raised, eyes locked on his targets. "Run!" The word was barely out of his mouth before the first shot rang out. A deafening crack split the air, sending echoes ricocheting through the empty warehouse. The bullet missed barely. The impact sent splinters flying from the wooden crate beside them. Madison felt Henry's grip tighten around her wrist as they launched into a sprint, feet pounding against the pavement. The world around them blurred. The night was thick, swallowing them in its depths, but the sounds of pursuit were all too clear. Another shot. Closer this time. They ducked, weaving through the maze of debris and rusted machinery. Each step was a gamble, a desperate attempt to outrun death itself. Their breath came in ragged gasps, lungs burning, but there was no time to stop. No time to think. Henry yanked her forward, leading them through a narrow alley between shipping containers. The scent of rust and oil clung to the air, mingling with the cold bite of fear. They needed to disappear. Now! Ahead, the city loomed, a beacon of distant streetlights and civilization. If they could just reach the streets, blend into the crowd, they might have a chance. Madison clutched the folders against her chest as if they were a lifeline. These papers held answers. But they also made them targets. Another shot. This one shattered the silence of the alley, sending a bullet slamming into the metal beside them. Sparks flew. Madison flinched but kept running. Then suddenly nothing. Silence. No footsteps. No gunfire. They didn't stop, but the absence of pursuit sent fresh unease crawling up Henry's spine. They were being toyed with. Madison risked a glance over her shoulder. The alley behind them was empty, but the feeling of being watched clung to her skin like static electricity. Finally, the glow of streetlights washed over them as they stumbled into the outskirts of the city. The streets were quiet, too quiet. It was late, but something about the silence felt unnatural. "We need a plan," Henry said between gasps. Madison nodded, forcing herself to focus. Her hands trembled as she flipped open one of the folders. A name. A photograph. A girl with wide, innocent eyes staring up at her from the page. "Isabella," she whispered. Henry looked over her shoulder. The caption beneath the photo sent a cold wave through his veins. "Missing. Last seen 3 months ago. Case closed due to lack of evidence." Madison's fingers curled around the paper. Her chest ached as she imagined the grief of Isabella's parents, the helplessness they must have felt as their daughter's case was ignored and forgotten. "We were right," she said, voice trembling. "It's bigger than just him." Henry's jaw tightened. "And we just put a target on our backs by taking this." They both knew they couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Not without knowing who they could trust. The corruption was deeper than they had realized, and if they weren't careful, they'd be next on the list of the disappeared. "We need to go public," Henry said suddenly. Madison frowned. "What?" "The newspaper," he said, pointing toward the distant city center. "If we can get this out before they can stop us, we'll have protection. They can't silence the whole press." Madison hesitated. It was dangerous. The moment they handed over these files, the story would be bigger than them. It would paint a massive target on their backs. But she also knew they had no other choice. "Let's go." The walk to the newspaper office felt endless. Every passing car made them flinch. Every shadow felt like it was closing in. The city, usually a place of noise and life, felt cold and empty. Finally, the newspaper building came into view, a simple structure, its windows still glowing with the lights of late-night editors working against deadlines. Henry pushed the door open, and a security guard at the front desk looked up, startled. "What are you two doing here this late?" Henry didn't waste time. "We need to see the editor. It's urgent." The guard narrowed his eyes but after a moment nodded. Maybe it was the desperation in their faces. Maybe it was fate. Minutes later, they were seated across from the editor himself, a man with tired eyes and a sharp mind, someone who had seen too much in his years but never quite enough to prepare for this. "What do you have?" he asked, flipping through the folders. Madison swallowed hard. "Children are disappearing," she said. "And we have proof." Silence. The editor scanned the pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to realization. His hands tightened around the paper. He exhaled slowly, the weight of it all settling on him. "This," he murmured. "This is bigger than I thought." "We need to publish it," Henry said. "Before they find us." The editor hesitated. He knew the risks. Exposing something like this wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. But as he looked up at the two of them, he saw something in their eyes. Conviction. Truth. And he knew he couldn't ignore it. "This won't be easy," he warned. "Once this goes out, there's no undoing it." Madison's heart pounded. They had spent the entire night running, searching, risking everything. And now they were at the precipice of something far greater than themselves. She met Henry's gaze. "We know." The editor nodded once. Then he picked up the phone. And just like that, the truth was set in motion. "I'll help you," the editor finally said, his voice weighted with urgency. "But we need to be careful. Extremely careful. If we're dealing with a network, one wrong move and they'll erase every trace of evidence before we can act." His fingers tapped anxiously against the desk, eyes darting between Henry and Madison. "We can't go in blind. I'll reach out to people I trust, but we need to stay under the radar. If they even suspect we're onto them, we're finished." Madison barely heard his words. Her gaze was locked onto something outside the window. The cat. The same cat that had been leading them all night. It sat motionless on the dark sidewalk, eyes glowing like twin moons in the dim streetlight. There was something unsettlingly knowing about the way it stared, like it understood everything happening around them. Madison swallowed, her breath hitching. "We're on the right track," she murmured. Henry followed her gaze, his own thoughts swirling in the heavy silence. "Yeah," he agreed, voice low. "But if that's true, it means we don't have much time." The moment they stepped out of the newspaper office, a suffocating tension wrapped around them like an invisible chain. The city, usually humming with life even at this late hour, seemed eerily quiet. Their footsteps echoed too loudly against the pavement. Every shadow felt like it was stretching toward them, concealing unseen dangers. The cat remained where it was, watching. Waiting. Then without warning it moved. A sleek blur disappearing down an alleyway. Madison's heart pounded. "It wants us to follow." Henry hesitated for only a second before nodding, and together they moved after it. The air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt as they weaved through the maze of backstreets. The cat guided them effortlessly, slipping through the darkness like a phantom. Then it stopped right in front of the abandoned warehouse. The same warehouse where they had nearly been killed. A heavy silence fell over them. The cat sat still, eyes locked onto the entrance. It was waiting. "We have to go back in," Madison whispered, determination stiffening her spine. Henry exhaled slowly, gripping the flashlight tighter. "This is insane," he muttered, but he was already moving. "We can't afford to get caught again." They crept toward the rusted metal doors, the smell of rust and old oil thick in the air. Henry placed a hand on the door, barely pushing it open. The groan of metal sent a shiver through them both, but no sound followed. No movement. For now they were alone. Or so they thought. Inside, the warehouse felt different. The air was colder, sharp like a knife against their skin. It was almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. The flickering flashlight beam danced across the concrete floor, revealing abandoned crates, broken glass, and something else. A trail of footprints. Fresh ones. Madison's pulse thundered in her ears. Someone's been here. Recently. Then, just as she opened her mouth to speak, a sound cut through the silence. Voices. Faint but undeniable. Henry reacted instantly, killing the flashlight. They froze, listening. The voices were close. Too close. Did you hear that? Henry breathed, barely audible. Madison's grip on his arm tightened. We're not alone. The cat, still at their feet, suddenly twitched its ears and bolted toward a side door. Its movements were deliberate, urgent. Without hesitation, Madison and Henry followed. The door creaked as they slipped inside a small, dimly lit room. A single, broken window allowed a sliver of moonlight to filter in, casting eerie shadows across the space. Then they saw it. A table. And on it, files. Photographs. Documents. Madison's breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward, hands trembling as she picked up a sheet of paper. A girl's face stared back at her. Big eyes. An innocent smile. Beneath the picture, a name. Isabella. Madison's vision blurred with the weight of realization. Her voice came out in a whisper. This girl, she disappeared 3 months ago. And no one did anything. Henry's jaw tightened as he flipped through the other papers. More names. More faces. More children. All gone. All ignored. His hands clenched around the folder. This isn't just about one man, he said, voice shaking with barely contained anger. This is bigger. Way bigger. A sudden sound outside sent them both into a panic. Heavy footsteps. Close. Too close. Madison shoved the files into her backpack, heart racing. We have to get out. Now. Henry nodded, already moving. They darted back through the warehouse, weaving between crates and rusted machinery. The exit was in sight when a shadow moved. And then, bang! A bullet shattered a crate inches from Madison's head. The gunman was back. And he wasn't alone. Run! Henry shouted, grabbing her wrist and yanking her forward. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets tearing through the darkness as they sprinted toward the alleyway. Madison's lungs burned, her legs screaming for rest, but there was no stopping now. The cat was already ahead, weaving through the streets, leading them away from the danger. But the footsteps behind them didn't fade. They were being hunted. Henry stole a glance over his shoulder. 2 figures. Gaining fast. We need to split up. Madison gasped. No way. Henry shot back. We stick together. A turn. Another turn. Then a fire escape. Henry shoved Madison toward it. Climb. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled up, Henry right behind her. Below, their pursuers skidded to a stop. One raised a gun. Another shot rang out, but missed by inches. They reached the rooftop, breathless. The city stretched before them, dark and silent, completely unaware of the war unfolding beneath its lights. Madison turned, gripping Henry's arm. We need to disappear. Now. Henry nodded. But as they moved, he glanced down. And there, sitting calmly on the rooftop's edge, was the cat. Watching. As soon as they stepped inside, Madison and Henry froze. The dimly lit room before them was a scene straight out of a nightmare. 3 men hunched over a rickety wooden table, their faces partially obscured by the flickering light of a single exposed bulb. Scattered across the table were papers, photographs, and documents, pieces of a puzzle they had no business seeing. But one image among them sent an ice-cold shiver down Madison's spine. Isabella. The missing girl. Madison's breath hitched. The grainy photograph, slightly crumpled, stared back at her. A face that had haunted headlines filled missing person reports and now was in the hands of these men. Her pulse pounded as realization set in. This wasn't just some secretive meeting. These men weren't bystanders. They were part of it. The very heart of the nightmare they had been chasing. Henry stiffened beside her, their eyes locking for a split second. A single unspoken thought passed between them. We're in too deep. From the corner of the room, the cat sat motionless, its glowing eyes cutting through the shadows. Watching. Waiting. As if silently whispering, you haven't seen everything yet. The men spoke in low voices, their tones sharp with urgency. Some of our documents were taken, one of them growled, slamming his fist against the table. The papers jumped. We need to find these intruders before they do something stupid. Henry's grip on Madison's wrist tightened. Every muscle in his body screamed for them to leave, but before they could make their escape, something completely unexpected happened. The cat moved. With eerie precision, it padded forward, stepping into the dim glow of the table's light. Its sleek body was silent, yet its presence was deafening. The men stopped talking. Their eyes snapped to the feline, puzzled. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered, his brow furrowing. The cat didn't flinch. It stood firm, its tail flicking once, twice, then it locked eyes with Madison. There was something knowing in that gaze, something impossible to ignore. A silent command. "Now!" "Let's go," Henry whispered, yanking Madison's hand. They turned and ran. Footsteps pounded behind them as they tore through the warehouse, adrenaline surging like fire in their veins. The men had realized they weren't alone. Shouts echoed through the dark, heavy with anger, but Henry and Madison didn't stop. "We need to call the police." Madison gasped between breaths. "Yeah," Henry panted. "But we have to act fast. If they realize we're onto them, they'll burn everything." The night air hit them like a wall as they burst outside. Their hearts pounded like war drums, the weight of what they had seen pressing down on them. But before Madison could dial, something made her pause. The cat. There it was again. Sitting calmly by the curb, its piercing eyes glowing in the dark. Watching them. Protecting them. It had guided them this far. Why? How? Madison swallowed hard, a strange lump forming in her throat. This cat. It knows. Sirens wailed in the distance, slicing through the night. Within minutes, police swarmed the warehouse. Officers moved with practiced precision, weapons drawn, voices firm. Henry and Madison stood back, breathless as they watched the operation unfold. And then confirmation. "We got them," an officer shouted. "We found everything. Documents, photos, this is it." The ring had been exposed. The men were in cuffs. The missing pieces now in the hands of justice. Yet, as relief washed over them, a lingering mystery remained. The cat. How had it led them here? How had it always been in the right place at the right time? And now, as the chaos settled and the weight of victory sank in, Madison turned to find it one last time. But it was gone. Her chest tightened. She searched the street, the alleys, the shadows. Nothing. Only the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. The cat had disappeared, just as silently as it had arrived. Days passed. News of the operation spread like wildfire. Local stations hailed Henry and Madison as heroes. Families of the missing found closure. Justice had won. But still, Madison couldn't shake the thought of the cat. And then one fateful afternoon at the local shelter, she saw them. Dozens of cats. Different colors, different sizes. But one in particular, caught her eye. A sleek, black feline with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce straight into her soul. She knelt, reaching out a gentle hand. "I think we found our friend." The cat blinked once, then stepped forward. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was something else. But one thing was clear, the silent hero of that terrifying night had left its mark. And some mysteries? They were never meant to be solved. If this story gripped you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications because we've got more mind-blowing stories coming your way. And hey, drop a comment. Have you ever had an encounter with something you just can't explain? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep your eyes open. You never know what or who might be watching.